They told Adrien he wasn't man enough to build a future. Not with his hands, not with his heart. The words clung to him like invisible chains, spoken in glances and half smiles, in the way his mother's eyes dimmed whenever she looked at him. To everyone else, Adrien was simply the younger son, the dreamer, the quiet one, Bishoen. But beneath the polished lines of his sketches and the careful rhythm of his days, he carried a secret that beat louder than any doubt. What they didn't know was that the part of himself he hid so well was the truest thing about him. Adrien was 23, a junior architect still finding his footing in a city that measured worth in steel and glass towers. He wasn't rich, but he worked with patience, believing that strong foundations were laid slowly. He had recently gotten engaged to Claire, a woman who seemed to embody everything his family had ever admired. She came from an old, steady family. Elegant, grounded, with a voice that carried both warmth and certainty. With her, Adrien thought he might finally convince his family and maybe himself that he belonged in the world they had built. Yet inside, a quiet truth pressed against his ribs: he was gay, and he had never said it out loud. Not to Claire, not to anyone. His mother adored Lucas, the older brother who was everything Adrien wasn't. Lucas strode through life with noise and shine cars, tailored suits, effortless charm. To their mother, success was not just preferred, it was proof of worth. She believed marriage was a transaction between families, a symbol of power and security, and she feared that Adrien, with his cautious heart and quiet dreams, could never shoulder that weight. She never said it outright, but her pride in Lucas was the shadow Adrien lived beneath. Claire had started noticing the space between them. Whenever she spoke about children or homes with sprawling gardens, Adrien's smile would falter, his gaze drifting to some point beyond the room. He told himself he was protecting her from disappointment, sparing her from a love that could never be complete. Yet his silence only deepened her doubts. She wanted intimacy, connection, someone who would plan a life beside her instead of watching from behind glass. His mother saw those cracks before Adrien did. She spoke gently, almost kindly, planting seeds in Claire's mind with the practiced grace of someone who had curated stories her entire life. She praised Lucas at every turn, painting him as solid, reliable, the kind of man who could carry a family name with ease. And she spoke of Adrien as if he were still unfinished clay, soft, delicate, not yet ready for the weight of another person's dreams. The breaking point came at a family dinner. Candles cast golden light over the long table as Lucas told stories of overseas deals and champagne openings, his laughter spilling easily into the air. Adrien sat beside Claire, silent, fingers tracing the edge of his plate. His mother leaned back in her chair, eyes on Claire, and with a smile that felt like a blade wrapped in velvet, she said, "A good daughter deserves a steady shoulder to lean on." Lucas has always been just that. Adrien, well, he's still chasing dreams. The words hung there, casual yet final, and Adrien felt the room tilt. Claire laughed politely, but her hand slipped from his under the table. In that moment, Adrien knew what they saw when they looked at him: someone fragile, someone almost. They thought his silence meant weakness. They thought his quiet meant emptiness. But deep down, he knew his silence came from carrying too much truth for a world that had never offered space for it. As the laughter continued around him, Adrien sat still, the sound fading to a dull hum. Something in him shifted. He didn't speak. He didn't argue. He simply watched, and for the first time, saw the table not as home, but as a stage where he had been performing a version of himself that had never truly existed. And that night, while the city pulsed beyond the windows, Adrien made a choice that would unravel every script they had written for him. If you believe in stories about breaking free and becoming who you really are, follow heart stories and stay. Because Adrien's story is only just beginning. Adrien vanished from that dinner like mist burned off by sunlight. He smiled through dessert, nodded as the night ended, and left without raising his voice. Yet inside, something fragile had cracked. He returned to his small apartment where Claire's engagement ring rested in its box on the kitchen counter. And for the first time, he wondered if she could already feel the hollowness in his hands when he held her. The truth gnawed at him. He had built their future on silence, and silence had never been strong enough to carry anything for long. His mother understood silence better than anyone, how to fill it, how to weaponize it. She began her work quietly, never admitting what she was doing. When Claire mentioned feeling uncertain about wedding plans, his mother offered comfort laced with poison. She told Claire that marriage was for those who could provide stability, that Lucas had always shown strength, while Adrien still needed time. She called it concern, said she only wanted Claire to be sure. Then she arranged a chance meeting at a charity event Lucas was hosting, presenting it as an opportunity for Claire to learn from someone who had already built a life of certainty. Lucas was effortless. He moved through the room like a man who had been born knowing where to stand. Claire watched him handle donors, speak about future ventures, smile with complete assurance. She told Adrien afterward that Lucas seemed comfortable in the world, like it had been made to fit him. Adrien only nodded, unable to explain that Lucas's world had never asked him to hide. When Claire tried to speak with Adrien about what she valued about children, shared goals, what they would stand for together, he froze. He spoke of design principles and structural load, anything but the weight of a life joined to hers. He wasn't avoiding her dreams. He was trying not to shatter them with the truth of who he was. But to her, it looked like evasion, a man unwilling to engage with the core of a life they were supposed to be building. His mother sensed the widening gap and struck cleanly. She met Claire privately under the guise of concern. She said Adrien lacked the resolve to weather hard years, that he still floated between ideas while Lucas anchored himself in action. She spoke not as a schemer, but as a protector, the way only someone practiced in manipulation could. She painted a picture of a future with Adrien that was fragile, unstable, destined to disappoint. Claire tried to resist. She reminded herself of Adrien's gentleness, his quiet intelligence, the careful way he listened. But the image his mother painted gnawed at her resolve. She began noticing how Adrien retreated when life demanded assertion, how he stayed silent in rooms where Lucas filled the air. It stopped feeling like kindness and began to look like absence. And as doubt rooted itself, the engagement ring on her finger grew heavier. In the end, her decision came in a voice both trembling and resolute. She told Adrien she needed stability, that love alone could not carry the life she envisioned. She never accused him of weakness, never mentioned Lucas's name, but the shadow of their comparison stood between them. Adrien didn't argue. He only nodded, like he had expected this all along. Though inside something collapsed, he packed his life into boxes with mechanical calm, returned the keys to his office, and left the city without telling anyone where he was going. The silence he had once used as a shield now became his exile. For the first time, he understood that avoiding the truth had not protected him, it had left him defenseless. As the train pulled him away from the skyline, Adrien stared at his reflection in the window and saw not failure, but erasure. He had allowed others to write his story until there was no space for him in it. In losing everything, he felt the sharp beginning of something else, the need to rebuild on honesty, or not at all. It would take him years to understand, but that night planted the seed of a truth that would one day set him free. No life can stand if it is built on pretending to be someone you are not. The first months away from the city were silent in a way that frightened Adrien. Gone were the distant sirens, the press of deadlines, the weight of other people's expectations clinging to every surface. In their place was only stillness, and the sound of his own thoughts echoing like footsteps in an abandoned building. He rented a small room above a hardware shop in a quiet coastal town, a place where no one knew his name or his past. The air smelled of salt and rust. He woke before dawn, sat at the rickety table by the window, and tried to sketch. His hands trembled at first, as if even lines on paper demanded a confidence he no longer possessed. But Adrien had always understood structure, how fractured things could be mended one layer at a time. He signed up for short-term therapy at a local clinic, speaking in halting fragments about the hollow shape of his days. It was there he admitted, for the first time to anyone, that he was gay. The words left his mouth like stones dropped into water. They didn't shatter anything. They simply sank, and the surface stilled, and he breathed as if for the first time in years. The therapist didn't flinch. She told him truth was never weakness. It was just the ground under his feet, waiting for him to stand on it. Adrien began accepting tiny architectural projects the local firms didn't want: community notice boards, weather shelters, garden benches. They paid little, but he treated each with reverence. He met carpenters, librarians, volunteers, people who worked not for prestige but for function, for warmth. Slowly, his name stopped being a question on their lips and became part of their conversations. Someone mentioned him when the town council sought designs for a small public library. Adrien submitted his plan quietly, lines clean and human-scaled. And when it was built, children ran their hands along the curved wood panels like they were touching something alive. It was during a meeting about that library's landscaping that Adrien met Daniel. Daniel was a local real estate developer, though nothing about him announced it. He spoke softly with a kind of steadiness that made rooms feel less sharp. He didn't praise Adrien's designs with grand words. He simply studied them, then said they felt honest. It startled Adrien more than any compliment he had ever received. Daniel never asked why Adrien worked alone or why his eyes sometimes went distant. He only treated Adrien as if his presence carried weight. They saw each other often after that at project sites, at the farmer's market, walking the coastal path in long, quiet stretches. Daniel never pushed, never pried, but his presence made Adrien less afraid to take up space. Through him, Adrien stopped treating his truth like a fault line. He began mentioning it casually in small circles, letting the words settle in the air without bracing for impact. No one recoiled. No one left. The world stayed intact, and so did he. Years passed like slow tides, and Adrien's work deepened. His designs grew bolder yet warmer, rooted in the belief that buildings could cradle the people who used them. He opened a modest studio in a refurbished boathouse, its wide windows spilling light across tables strewn with models. Local papers wrote quiet profiles about the young architect reviving forgotten corners of the coast. Clients came, not in floods, but in steady steps. Adrien no longer measured success in applause. He measured it in mornings where he woke next to Daniel, the ocean murmuring outside, and felt no need to hide any part of himself. In becoming visible, Adrien had not turned into someone else. He had simply stopped erasing who he already was. That slow unlearning became the spine of his new life, and though he rarely spoke of the years before, they shaped the way he carried himself with patience, with deliberate care, as if he were building something meant to last. What Adrien learned, and what settled into the marrow of his work, was this: healing does not arrive as a single triumph. It comes in the quiet labor of choosing yourself again and again until the shape of your life finally fits the truth you carry. The invitation arrived on thick cream paper, embossed with silver lettering that caught the light like water. Adrien read it twice before the meeting settled. The National Safe Haven Fund, a philanthropic organization focused on secure housing for LGBTQ+ youth, was hosting a gala to announce its newest project, a network of transitional homes designed to be not just shelters, but springboards. They wanted Adrien to design them. The board admired his work on community spaces, the way his buildings seemed to breathe with the people inside them. They also wanted him to co-host the gala, to stand on the stage as a face of their vision. Adrien placed the letter down carefully. He had not thought about his mother in years, or Lucas, or the orbit of privilege they still likely spun in. But this gala would draw every power circle in the region. The Safe Haven Fund had corporate sponsors, real estate tycoons, municipal leaders. It was exactly the kind of constellation his family never missed. A part of him braced, knowing they might see this event as a door to push back through. The weeks leading up to the gala were a blur of site models, planning meetings, and press briefings. Adrien worked with quiet precision, grounding every design decision in the lives it would touch. He visited youth shelters, spoke with counselors, traced the lines of cracked tiles and broken locks with his fingertips. These were the places he wanted to replace, not with monuments, but with safety that felt like sunlight on skin. Daniel watched him move through those days like someone assembling pieces of his younger self into something whole. The gala opened under soft gold light, held in the glass atrium of a restored railway station. Adrien wore a tailored suit the color of slate, simple and unadorned. He greeted donors, accepted congratulations, but his attention drifted as familiar laughter floated across the room. Lucas stood near the champagne bar, still surrounded by admirers. Their mother hovered nearby, her posture impeccable, eyes scanning the crowd like she owned it. And beside them, Claire. Older now, her presence quieter but still luminous. Adrien felt the old ache stir and then recede like a wave pulling back. They approached eventually, their smiles polished. Lucas spoke first, all charm and practiced warmth, congratulating Adrien on his little firm. Their mother praised the event's elegance as if she had orchestrated it herself. Claire said nothing at first, only studied him as if trying to reconcile the man before her with the ghost she had left behind. Lucas shifted quickly to business, mentioning a commercial development he was spearheading, hinting that Adrien's studio could be involved. It was said like an offering, but Adrien heard the presumption beneath it that proximity to him was theirs to reclaim at will. He did not flinch. He listened, then explained that his studio only partnered on projects aligned with their principles: transparent funding, community consultation, commitments to social benefit. He said it evenly, like reading a blueprint, not as defiance but as policy. Lucas laughed lightly, pretending not to hear the refusal. Their mother's smile thinned, the first crack in her control. Adrien didn't raise his voice or deliver some sharp rebuke. He simply held his ground as if it were natural to do so. Because now it was, the man they once called fragile was speaking in the language of boundaries, and it left no room for negotiation disguised as affection. The rest of the night unfolded like distant music. Adrien moved between conversations with city planners, youth advocates, and donors who saw him not as someone proving himself, but as someone already steady. His family drifted to the edges of the room, orbiting him now instead of eclipsing him. As the speeches began, Adrien stood near the stage with Daniel's quiet presence at his shoulder. He felt no urge to confront or correct the stories his mother once told. He didn't need to. They no longer had the power to frame his narrative. In that moment, Adrien understood something he wished he had known years earlier. Strength is not measured by how loudly you fight to be accepted. It is measured by how calmly you define the terms of your own belonging. The speeches wound toward their crescendo, the hum of cutlery fading as the lights dimmed to a soft amber glow. Adrien stood just off stage, the outline of his models displayed behind the podium, small clusters of houses shaped like open arms, each designed to hold lives that had been pushed to the edges. He had braced himself for applause, for numbers, for the usual donor theater. What he had not braced for was the name that slid across the screen when the largest endowment of the night was announced. Claire Foundation, Safe Homes. The words glimmered across the glass wall of the atrium like a wave breaking, and the room rippled with surprise. Claire rose from her table near the center, smoothing the dark silk of her dress as she walked to the stage. Her heels struck the floor in sharp, measured beats, but her face carried none of the distance Adrien remembered. She took the microphone in both hands, and her voice trembled at first, not from fear, but from the weight of choosing truth in a room built on performance. She said she had once believed security was a prize granted by marrying the right kind of man, the one who carried prestige like a shield. She said she let herself be convinced that Adrien was not that man, that he was uncertain, incomplete, a gamble too risky to stake her future on. She confessed that those doubts were not hers at all, but gifts carefully placed in her mind by people who stood to benefit from her leaving him. Claire turned toward the crowd, but her gaze kept drifting back to Adrien. She said that after her marriage to Lucas unraveled, she uncovered the quiet architecture of deceit that had shaped it. She found messages from their mother, urging Lucas to protect the family's image, warning him not to let Adrien drag her down. She found notes planning the timing of her chance meeting with Lucas, strategies for presenting Adrien as a liability rather than a partner. The betrayal was clinical in its precision. She said she had carried shame like lead, not for leaving Adrien, but for never questioning why she was so ready to believe he could not hold her. When her marriage collapsed under his own vanity, she decided the only way to atone was to build something that could not be taken from anyone by whispers or manipulation. So she had taken her inheritance, cut ties with the family trust, and created the Claire Foundation to fund secure housing for LGBTQ+ youth because no one should lose their place in the world for daring to be who they are. Silence settled over the atrium like snowfall. Claire's voice steadied as she ended, simply, "I am sorry, Adrien, for believing lies about you and for not seeing the truth you were already living." Then she stepped away from the microphone and into the quiet that followed. A quiet that did not crush, but cleared the air. Adrien stepped forward then, not to take the stage from her, but to share it. He reached for Daniel's hand first, grounding himself, and then walked to the podium. He did not speak about the pain or the pain it had taken to arrive here. He only thanked the room for investing in honesty, because honesty was what had rebuilt his life when everything else was stripped away. He looked at Claire as he said it, and she nodded, tears cutting silver paths through her composure. Beyond her, their mother sat rigid, her influence evaporating like perfume in the cold. Lucas stared at the floor, the weight of his name no longer enough to anchor him as investors began to glance elsewhere, already seeking distance from the wreckage of his image. Adrien felt no triumph, only release. He had not come to defeat them. He had come to outgrow the world where they once held the script of his life. As applause surged, Adrien lifted Daniel's hand and let the light catch on the simple ring Daniel wore, the quiet signal of the life they had chosen. It was not grand, but it was real, and it had been built without permission from anyone. Because family, he knew now, was not the place you are given. It is the place you build from truth and respect, even if you must walk alone to find it. Would you have had the courage to walk away from the people who defined your worth for you? If Adrien's journey moved you, follow Heart Stories and share this story to remind someone living your truth is never a mistake.